was about long COVID, ME, CFS, I'm not sure what that is, and fibromyalgia. For patients with ME, CFS, and you'll have to explain to me what that is, or long COVID, the standard advice given is to exercise for mitochondrial health. But for them, it often triggers severe crashes. What is happening at the cellular level when the energy budget is broken, and how can these individuals safely rehabilitate their mitochondria without causing further damage?
Yeah, that's a really tough problem. And
this was the most liked, the most commented thing on your videos, because these people are suffering and they're just not being given answers, I guess.
Yeah. In the US, there's an estimated 3 to 5 million people who have either myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, or, long COVID version of this. In the UK, it's somewhere between 2 and 3 million, I think. And then worldwide, there's 24 million people have these syndromes, right?
What are the symptoms for someone that hasn't experienced it? What are the symptoms that they're experiencing?
Chronic fatigue.
Just always being sort of tired and low energy, feeling low energy.
Yeah. Feeling low energy, is an experience, right? So you go to your doctor and say, I feel so tired. And then you look in the blood works, everything's fine. But so there's a disconnect between what we know how to measure biochemically and then what the person is experiencing. We don't have a good understanding of the connection between the biology and the biochemistry in the blood and even process in the brain and how people feel. So there's a disconnect here. And ME/CFS, chronic fatigue, long COVID, these people have been a little bit ostracized from the medical community because doctors are really stuck. They have these patients which are really difficult patients to deal with. First, they don't know what's wrong with them, and second, they don't have tools to help them get better. And then the classical thing is, exercise. But then many of these people, when they exercise, they actually get worse. And there's some studies that show increased inflammation. So those signals of energy resistance, increased energy friction in the body, go up after exercise in a normal person. And these people with chronic fatigue, it seems like they can skyrocket. And then that leads to this post-exertional malaise, right? We talked earlier about how the marker of energetic stress, GDF-15, can go to the brain and make you feel sick, right?
Yeah.
Or make you feel, nauseous or, tired. Other cytokines from the immune system when you're sick, when you're fighting an infection, do the same thing. The best study on mitochondria and chronic fatigue syndrome was published last year or the year before, and it showed that there is a deficiency in energy transformation in the mitochondria, the muscle. They took muscle biopsies, a little piece of muscle from the quad, from the thigh, and then they looked at how well can the mitochondria in the muscle of people with chronic fatigue syndrome flow energy. And what they found is the capacity is much lower. If the mitochondria can't flux energy properly, you should feel like you don't have the capacity to push, right, to exercise. So why is that? Why do those people have lower mitochondrial energy transformation capacity? We don't know. There's so many stories, and I've been curious and interested about this. And I remember this family friend who came for dinner one night, and she was asking me, what do you work on? And what do you do? And so I tell her we work on mitochondria and psychobiology, mitochondrial psychobiology, how the mind and the body relate, energetically. And she said, well, I have an interesting story for you. I said, okay, what's the story? So I used to have chronic fatigue syndrome. So I perked up. I was like, what happened? She was visibly an energetic person. It didn't look like she had, an issue with energy. So she said she was in her 20s and she was debilitated. She couldn't work, and she lived in this place, and her life was kind of completely upside down because she didn't have energy to do anything, which is, I think, a common story. And she was in bed multiple hours, every day, and struggling to go get groceries, and everything was a drag about life. And then one summer, this guy from Hawaii, which was a friend of a friend, came over for the summer for a little trip, and they had an affair. She had a boyfriend, and this was a long time that she had a human connection like this.
So you're saying?
I'm not saying. What ended up happening is she said my chronic fatigue kind of lifted, and I didn't have to do anything. And then after that summer, she never had chronic fatigue again. And she kind of reintegrated the normal life. I don't know what the lesson is here. I don't know if there's a generalizable principle, but there's a lot of those stories where people end up in a really dark place in their life, and either they're diagnosed with a mental illness or with chronic fatigue syndrome or with kind of a psychosomatic, label or whatever that is. There's always kind of precipitating conditions. Sometimes it's in response to medical interventions like immunization. Sometimes it's in response to, an infection or like a parasite.
Mold and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I know some people that have like mold poisoning or whatever, and they get...
Yeah, very often there's like a trigger. There's like sometimes a lingering kind of condition, and then sometimes there's an acute trigger, and the body's never able to fully recover. So what do we take from that, story of a summer fling?
Well, I take from it hope.
Yeah.
That, even when the cards seem to be stacked against you and it feels like you might have to live with this thing for a long time, that in many cases, miraculous things happen that defy the odds. And hope itself, I think, can keep us in an optimistic mindset.